on Senate Bill 2180, and the clerk will read the short title.
Relating to the opportunity to provide public comment at a meeting of a public entity.
That happens all the time. And we welcome the sponsor to the podium.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair Roars and members of the State and Local Government Committee. For the record, my name is Senator Bob Paulson, and I'm from District 3 in Minot. This morning, I bring you Senate Bill 2180, a bill to allow for public comment at public meetings. The ability of a citizen to redress their government and be heard is a bedrock principle of our nation and our state. Frustration with the inability to do so was one of the main reasons we fought the Revolutionary War and established our independence as a nation. And that frustration exists in North Dakota today. Consider a mom who desires to address the school board whose members she helped elect and whose tax dollars enable it to function. She contacts the school administration and finds out that public comment is only allowed once a year, and her remarks have to be submitted beforehand for approval to be put on the agenda. Imagine if she found this out just after the annual meeting and was told she'd have to wait for almost another year to redress them. Or consider another mom in a different city who hears about an issue that was just discussed at a recent school board meeting that affects her and her children. She decides she needs to make her voice heard, so she checks the website, learns that public comment is allowed, clears her calendar and arranges childcare, travels to the school board meeting to address the school board members that she helped elect, only to be told that her comments are out of order because she is addressing an item that is not on the agenda. It was on the agenda at the last meeting, but it's not on the agenda for this meeting. Another scenario where a political subdivision is at its annual meeting where several hundred of its members are gathered finds public comment out of order. These things are currently happening in North Dakota, and I believe it is incumbent upon us as legislators to protect our constituents' ability to redress their government at all levels of our state. And it is my desire to address these scenarios in this bill. Ms. Engebretson with the League of Cities was kind enough to discuss the bill with me after it was submitted. I've actually received a fair amount of input. And she asked me questions, right? Right. And she asked me questions like, okay, do you want to affect every subcommittee in the state or every special meeting? And that is not the intent of this bill. And so I realized the language is overbroad. She was kind enough to work on amendments, and I have provided them to each of you. I'll speak to them in a moment.
Can I hold on, pause
Yes.
a second? Did you, have we had a chance to upload this yet? Can we do that as quickly, just so that everybody in the crowd has the ability to access it through the testimony link? Because I think we're going to have a lot of people trying to follow along and not be able to.
It's true.
So if you can scan it in and upload it, that would be amazing. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem, Madam Chair. I also read the opposition testimony from the School Boards Association, and I agree with several of their ideas, and they are included in the amendments. There are a couple of them that I don't agree with, and I wanted to explain. I would ask that you consider not changing the language from must to may. To do so could allow the scenario of only allowing public comment once a year that I described earlier to continue to occur. Additionally, limiting public comment to only items on the agenda unnecessarily limits the ability of citizens to redress their government, which again is one of the bedrock principles of our country, and it is the intent of this bill. I mentioned earlier how this is already negatively affecting our constituents. Madam Chair and committee members, if you will reference the amendment that I passed out, the meat of it starts on page 2. Where it creates a new chapter 44-04. And it's changing this from all public meetings to only public meetings of political subdivisions. So public comment, regular meetings of political subdivisions. A regular meeting of a political subdivision must include an opportunity for an individual in attendance to provide public comment. For a political subdivision meeting more frequently than once a month, this section applies to at least one regular meeting. An individual providing comment at a meeting shall provide to the political subdivision in writing the individual's name and address, and this ensures that they have standing and aren't from another state or something. Political subdivision may not limit the topic of a public comment to the topics on the agenda for the meeting. They may limit a public comment by time per speaker and total time for public comment, or both. Political subdivision may develop a policy regarding public comment rules for regular meetings. The policy may provide that a public comment must be pertinent to the political subdivision. Don't come talk to the school board about the city
Or
streets.
the legislature about property taxes?
Well, that, yes,
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Mhm.
It may not interfere with the orderly conduct of the regular meeting. It may not be defamatory, abusive, harassing, or unlawful. And I'm going to read this as if the language was struck. May be prohibited if the public comment includes confidential or exempt information, or the public comment is otherwise prohibited by law. Think teachers union negotiations or personal information about a student, not allowed to be talked about by law. And it must be limited in frequency to one comment per individual per meeting. And the item that I lined out in lines 6 and 7 of page 3, I spoke with Mr. Bjornson briefly, and he said that's fine. That's something the intern can take care of.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, I recognize that when I walk away from this podium, the bill is yours, and so I ask your consideration to adopt the amendment. Madam Chair and members of the committee, with that, I thank you for what you do and for allowing me to present the bill, and that concludes my testimony, and I'll be happy to stand for any
You
questions.
stole so many of my questions by proposing that amendment. So Senator Brownberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Paulson, I'm just curious on on line 2 or subsection 2 of your comment about the individual's name and address. You alluded to that so that a subdivision can, or a political sub can deny somebody from testifying. My concern with that is, what if I am a Moorhead resident but have a business in Fargo? So can I still testify if I have a Moorhead address?
Madam Chair and Senator Braunberger, I may have overspoken on that as to how they'll use it. That specific item was a request from the League of Cities. And as they explained to me, the intent is just to know who's there talking to them before they start. And if the person says, I'm from Saskatchewan, then they know that they can either prevent that person from speaking because their comments won't be pertinent, or they'll at least know how to take their comments.
Senator Paulson, yesterday we actually had a conversation about central voter file. And one of the comments that was made was there are certain people who are allowed to redact their home address, like the sheriff, that kind of stuff. We might want to consider just making sure that there's some language in there that not everybody is required to provide their address, but that they can ask for it, something like that, whatever that looks like, people who are domestic violence, that
Right.
all that stuff. We want to just make sure that we tighten that up to protect people who already are protected in other sections of code.
That's a good point, Madam Chair. I'd be happy to work on that if you'd like. me to.
Thank you, Senator Wallen.
Thank you, Chairman Roars. Senator Paulson, in your amendment on line 29 of page 2, it says limit a public comment of time per speaker and total time, or both. There's no minimum amount of time that's allowed. So I'm the public entity and I'm saying, okay, you can speak 1 minute and we're only going to allow 10 minutes of testimony.
Madam Chair, Senator Whalen, if the committee would like to put something in there like 2 or 3 minutes, I certainly wouldn't object. I just received enough feedback that I wanted the bill to have a chance.
I would argue that if you have 200 people in the room, if you guarantee everybody gets to speak for 2 to 3 minutes, you'll
But-
never actually get to accomplish the work that is in front of you as well, which is part of your job. Like, I
And-
think there's a balance there that we just
Okay.
have to figure out what that looks like.
Madam Chair, on this, it says the total time that's allowed also, so that you could say a total of 30 minutes. So you're not going to have unlimited time.
Yeah, and I've done that even
Right.
in this room.
Yes, Madam Chair, I think what I would envision is, 3 minutes per person, you've got 30 minutes, pick your 10 best speakers and go, kind of thing.
I have a second. May I continue?
Continue.
And then I have a second question on page 3, line 10, must limit the frequency to 1 comment per individual. So if the political subdivision wants that person to come up and talk again, are they prohibited from doing that?
Madam Chair, Senator Whalen, I thought about that and I don't think so at all. It's certainly up to the discretion of the chair to say, we have a questions we think Mr. Jones can answer. Mr. Jones, would you be willing to approach the podium? I think that's not at all prevented by this bill.
Okay, thank you.
I wonder if actually that belongs better under the apolitical subdivision may, like the subsection 3 on the page previous. that they may limit them to speaking one time per meeting.
Then that gives them
And
flexibility.
that way it's not, it must be part of your policy that they can only speak one time. That might be a way to.
Madam Chair, I think that'd be a good addition.
Any further questions for Senator Paulson? This is a much better draft. I appreciate the work you put into it.
Thank you, Madam
And
Chair.
Ms. Ingebretson. Any further testimony in favor? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Corey Peterson. I am here representing the League of Cities. Prior to doing this, I was the mayor of Horace for 8 years, completing my term back in July. I have a lot of experience doing public comment. We do that, or we did that every meeting that we had. We met twice a month. We did allow, pretty much comments on anything. We did have restrictions, and of course, I controlled that. If it got out of hand, we would have to, tamp that down a little bit, or if it got more contentious than needed to be. Most of the time, I gave everybody 2, maybe 3 minutes, and if there wasn't that many people in the room that wanted to get involved, I'd let it go a little bit longer. It was at my discretion. We tried to keep the meetings moving because otherwise, if you have people getting up and grandstanding, and they will do that, they could go on for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and that takes the meeting till midnight sometimes, so we didn't want to do that. So it was a discretion that I had to be able to allow these, the public comments, and we tried to make sure that we accommodated them the best we could because we wanted everybody to be heard. And sometimes they would bring up a topic that we had not even thought about or something we were not aware of at the time. So those are good to have where they can be brought up like that. So initially, when we looked at this bill, we were opposed to it because it was way too broad, did not have any parameters or guardrails on it. Like Senator Paulson said, we had a conversation with him yesterday, explain our concerns, and he's addressed these in the amendment. So we appreciate his work with us on this one, and we are in support of it right now.
Mr. Peterson, do you think that this new draft strikes the balance between the public and the business of getting things done?
Correct. I do. Like I said, it was too broad earlier, and it would allowed for grandstanding where your meetings could have gone on forever without some type of a guardrail to be able to close them down or, have them get to the point. Because sometimes you would also have the situation where you would have 10 people getting up, belaboring the same point. So.
Any further questions for Mr. Peterson?
All right. Thank you for your time.
Any further testimony in favor? Testimony in favor? Any testimony opposed? And I know you guys have all had very little time if you've even seen the amendment, but at least now you've heard what the concept is, so.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Roars, members of the committee. My name is Chrisanne Norby-Johnner. I am in-house legal counsel for the North Dakota School Boards Association. The NDSBA represents all 168 North Dakota public school districts and their boards, and we are here today in opposition to Senate Bill 2180. Despite constantly refreshing my browser, I still have not been able to look at the amendments, but I have heard testimony on them. You have my written testimony as submitted, where I do begin by just bringing the committee back to the Constitution and some basic understanding of the forms that get created in public boardrooms. The reason I lay the foundation for that is just to give an understanding that our public board meetings are not public meetings. They are meetings held in public. And we have a long tradition of public boards being able to create the forums in their boardrooms with the proper rules in place to ensure that we don't have open public forums where people can interrupt meetings where important board work is being conducted, where they can speak at any time. Those are the rules we have in our boardrooms, and they're in there for a reason. Most of the school boards we work with do allow public comment with rules created, and it's a forum that is designated or limited. And the public comment that a lot of our school boards follow a policy that at the NDSBA we have drafted as a template. And a lot of the proposed, you might say, amendments that are in my written testimony actually come directly from that policy. And they're rules to maintain that designated limited public forum and boardroom those rules are created to maintain. This Senate bill would require public bodies to include public comment periods at every board meeting on any topic without restriction. I think we've heard testimony even from the sponsor that is understandably too broad. The may language that we would recommend is because we maintain the position that this should be, these local rules should be controlled at the local level. And if this committee were to issue a do pass recommendation, we would respectfully request amendments that would ensure that local control. I talk about having having a policy that would maybe include topics, including but not limited to the following: public entities control the types of meetings at which public comments would be allowed, including regular versus special meetings. The purpose of this, when we maintain language like this in our template policies, is because the regular meetings that school boards and public boards are conducting, they contain a variety of matters. That's your regular business. The special meetings, those are topic limited. We have boards that will call a special meeting for a very singular topic. For example, maybe accepting a teacher resignation, allowing public comment on that, or allowing public comment on any topic at a special meeting that's narrowed in on a specific topic. That's really not reasonable. So we always recommend language like this to maintain at what types of meetings the public comments are allowed. Public comments being limited to agenda items only. One really important reason that we recommend this type of language in the template policy is because this is a boardroom where the board's conducting business, and they have typically public comment happens at the end of the meeting when all the agenda items have been discussed. And it makes sense that the public would have an opportunity to then comment on those items, because those were the items that were publicly noticed. Those were the items that every member of public, not just those who are there to give public comment, were noticed, were going to be discussed. When you open public comment to items that are not on an agenda, the public didn't have any notice that those discussions were going to occur. And we have very strict notice requirements in our open meeting laws. So it's a pretty important policy point that we include. No individual public commenter being able to speak more than once, limiting public comment periods. I assume that the committee would work on that and think thoughtfully about that. Also ensuring there's no undue interruption or other interference with the orderly conduct of board business, including, we always have language that would include but not be limited to defamatory, abusive, harassing, unlawful public comments. It's really important to include language like that to maintain the board decorum. There's even a number of circumstances when public comments might be unlawful. And I know the bill sponsor did talk about the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, that's FERPA. Student information, education records, that is not open for public comment. And although personnel matters do have to be discussed in open meeting, there are circumstances that are special to school boards in particular, where public comment on personnel matters actually cannot be discussed. If you have a complaint about an administrator and a teacher, and you want to get up and talk about that in a public comment period, you are biasing an entire school board that might have to sit in a neutral capacity in a future non-renewal or discharge hearing. And now that school board can't do that, because that certified employee, a teacher or an administrator, has a due process right to a fair and impartial hearing. So that is when school boards have rules in their policies that prohibit public comment about complaints and personnel matters of that nature, they're not trying to silence the public. They're actually protecting their employees and the due process rights of those employees. Those are just two examples of the type of public comments that would not be allowed. And I would stand for any questions.
Senator Bromberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Norby Johnner, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I understand the importance of having privacy for your employees and everything like that, but we also have the ability to go into executive meetings, which would close it to the public. When you do that, do you allow then testimony from the public that has a complaint about a staff member in those executive meetings invite those individuals?
Madam Chair, Senator Bromberger, members of the committee. Actually, to be clear, personnel matters cannot be discussed in executive session. Personnel matters in general have to be discussed in open meeting. If a member of the public had a complaint about a personnel member, they should be resolving that at the lowest level possible, not the school board, right? They should be taking that to teacher first, building principal, superintendent, going up the chain of command, to handle that, to keep it out of the boardroom altogether. There are limited times when a school board would be in executive session talking about a personnel matter. I mean, very limited. It would be a non-renewal hearing would occur in executive session, a discharge hearing would occur in executive session, and discussions about contract negotiations or potential separation and buyout would be an executive session. But a school board should not be going into executive session to discuss personnel matters, complaints. They really shouldn't be involved.
Any further questions? So I'm working on, and then you in a second, but I'm working on figuring out how soon it'll be uploaded. We can see it in our system, but I can see how you can't see it on your end.
Okay.
What I would like is if you could kind of do a side-by-side for us
Sure.
between your proposed amendments and what was proposed by the bill sponsor, and just let us know what's missing or what's in conflict. And if you can just email that to me once you had a chance to do that, that would be great. Senator
happy to.
Castaneda.
Ms. Norby Johnner, I definitely appreciate your testimony. Give me things to think about. Specifically, that you brought up some good points about why public. I mean, I like the way you put it. It's a public meeting, not a meeting held in public, and I think there's some fairness in that. That being said, what, in your opinion, then is the appropriate vehicle to allow public comment to the school board if it is not at a public meeting because it's not a meeting held in public?
Thank you, Senator. Madam Chair, members of the committee, that's a great question. We recommend that our board members make themselves available. When you're elected to a board, you should be available to the public. And we also have template policies. By the way, we love policy at NDSBA. Not sure if you've noticed. We have template policies about that engagement with the public, right? And there are also ways for members of the public to request agenda items, right? Or request, we also separate in our policy, I should point out, members of the public can request to be an agenda item separately, to give a presentation to a school board, for example, or to be on an agenda. I'll admit, under our policies and our recommendations, the agenda is still set by the board, typically board president, maybe in conjunction with administration, and they do decide how, what goes into a meeting. But there are avenues for the public to reach out to the board, the school board members outside of public meeting. I mean, quite frankly, everyone emails pretty frequently, and I would say our board members, if there's a member of the public with a concern, emails and phone calls are very typical. It gets to the board. But, to address your question, but does it occur in public? You're right. Right now, not unless it's agenda item. But I will say, we create template policies. We make recommendations. We encourage our school boards to, maintain rules of decorum to make sure we don't have an open public forum. But we do work with school boards that allow public comment on any topic. It does happen.
Continue.
I think your comments are very thoughtful, and I see where you're going with this. And even I would say, here, if somebody got up and started talking about Bill 2187, Madam Chair would probably say that's at 10:15. Thank you very much. So I fully understand that, but I do, at the end of the day, feel that there is that my constituents feel that they lack access to a school board, which is a publicly elected group of people. I think that you have brought up a lot of really good reasons of why the current structure may not be the best or most effective way to allow public comment. but it doesn't take away the fact that I think that there are a very large amount of my constituents, and I would dare say across North Dakota, that feel extremely disenfranchised with their ability to affect or comment with school boards. So what would be your, and you have to answer this nationally now because I'm definitely in a spot, but can you think of a way that we can expand policy that still mirrors what you guys attempt to do so you can run daily business? But I do feel that there's got to be a way that we need to open this up, and maybe, you know, we're trying to strike that balance. So would you have any comment to that, any ideas, not even amendment to this, because it definitely has to be opened up. And if you truly believe this is not the vehicle, we got to figure one out.
Thank you, Senator, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I respect that. I do. In my written testimony, the second page where I have listed the A through G, you know, I called them potential amendments, and I will do a side-by-side. I'll look at what I, you know, originally presented, which again matches the template policy we recommend alongside the amendments that have been proposed. And maybe this is the vehicle. Maybe it is.
Any further questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Further testimony opposed?
Chair Roars, members of the committee, my name is Dr. Paul Stremick. I represent the North Dakota School Study Council, and I'm a former superintendent. In case you don't know who the Study Council is, it's roughly the 16 largest schools in the state. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on Senate Bill 2180. The schools I represent are opposed to this bill in its current form. Most schools have a policy on public comment. School boards are required to post an agenda so the public knows what is going to be discussed. Oftentimes, people try to engage school board members in a conversation during the public comment. Discussing items not on the agenda is frowned upon and can be a violation of the open meetings law. Public comments should be limited to items on the agenda. When the public testifies at legislative committees, they need to stick to the topic, as already has been talked about. It is not a free open mic. In fact, there are times when neutral testimony is not even accepted at committee meetings. There needs to be a time limit and a restriction on repeating what's already been said, as you typically do in your committees. To limit lawsuits for libel and slander, comments about individuals such as coaches, teachers, etc., should be prohibited. If there truly are issues with personnel, teachers and or administrators would move through the non-renewal. And as mentioned earlier, the school board is the judge and the jury on a non-renewal. And by hearing some comments made, they could be prejudiced and have to recuse themselves during that process. We ask for a do not pass on Senate Bill 2180. I do have an amendment I would like to hand out, and it's from the North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders. Dr. Amy Kopis drafted it, and we are in support of it. I will hand that out. There's really two changes that we'd like to see. Must be related to an item on the agenda. And again, this is so people know what is going to be discussed. And then the second one is comments about individual staff or personnel are strictly prohibited. And the rationales are listed there. And school districts do have complaint and grievance procedures when there's complaints about personnel. And I know those are followed because part of what I do is investigations for school districts around the state. So if it does move to the school board level and they aren't comfortable doing it, they hire an outside investigator, and I do numerous investigations throughout the state. So I know that process is used. I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. How do you, so I'm struggling with this line between if it wasn't on the agenda, you can't talk about it, and how in the world does the public let you know that there's a problem if they can't talk about it, right? Like, how do we square that circle, or whatever the term would be? That one's not the right analogy, but you don't understand what I'm saying.
Madam Chair, I believe, members of the committee, I believe, again, there are policies already in place where people can file a complaint or a grievance, especially if it's personnel. Now, if it's the math curriculum, they can do the same thing, and it goes through the process.
How does the public know what that process is? Like, how do I know that I can't show up at a meeting and talk about something that's bothering me and that I have to follow this process? Like, I think that's where our challenge is.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I believe what typically happens is if there is a concern, they do talk to a board member or even a school administrator, and they inform them of the process. They say, okay, this is where you need to start. You don't get to start at the school board. I mean, for example, you don't get to start at the Supreme Court, as what one of my colleagues say. You start the proper chain of command. And again, it can move up through the process. And if the school board president or school board members want that on the agenda, it will get on the agenda. I truly believe that.
Further questions for Dr. Stremick?
Yeah.
Man, I couldn't even read my own handwriting. Barta then Bromberger.
Okay.
We're going
Thank you,
alphabetical.
Chairman Roars and Mr. Stremick. I keep being drawn to the agenda, and I think that's some of the frustration. And I think it's the process of getting things. And as we heard earlier, setting the agenda is subject to the school board. So I think there might be the perception that it's easy to hide topics of concern. And, as part of the process, I think the length of it, say, oh, someone shows up, say, no, you can't speak about that. You need to visit with us. Well, then we're into the next meeting. And instead of addressing the issue in real time, we end up postponing, and emotions grow and fester. And I think that we just becomes the stone rolling downhill, gaining momentum. So I think, addressing things as early as possible. So the agenda process, I think, is something like to look at. And, you represent a smaller subset of the school boards, although I guess population wise, the larger set of that. But can you speak to that process? Because I believe there's this education component to it, that something resonates with the citizen and they say, this is something that we need to address, and I want to take care of it now. And then they say, well, wait, no, you have to do this. And I think that just feeds to the problem. So, so it's a combination of education to the process and the timeliness of the process. Are you addressing that in any way, or as an organization, do you have templates as well that might facilitate that?
Madam Chair, Senator Barta, members of the committee, again, there are many policies in place in school districts for complaints and concerns. For example, let's say somebody has a complaint about the hockey program and it's brought up at the school board meeting because it's free open mic. The hockey coach doesn't know that's going to happen, so the hockey coach is not there to defend their program. They don't know anything about it. And so, that's one of the reasons we think it needs to be items on the agenda. And we are in agreement that if there are issues and they aren't being dealt with, it does end up at the board level. But again, you don't start at the school board. It goes through the chain of command and the policies that we have in place. And sometimes it is slow. I apologize, but I mean, it can be slow at times.
It is government after all. Senator Bromberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Stremick? Yeah. So what happens if there's a total failure of the chain of command? How to say they try to get meetings with these people just refuse to even entertain the individual? How does then the board really know that they've exhausted everything? I guess what are the processes to make sure that that's happening?
Senator Bromberger, Madam Chair, members of the committee, that does happen. And what typically happens after that is, let's say it goes to the superintendent does nothing. It's been my experience that what happens is that person then files a formal complaint on the superintendent for not dealing with it. And that's submitted to the board chair. And again, the policy says they have 60 days to act on that complaint. And those are the types of investigations I get involved in where the board chair doesn't want to do it on the superintendent because they're close working relationship or they're just don't have the time to do it. And I know that does happen because I do those investigations. So again, if you file that formal complaint, then it's a 60-day time period for our response to get back to them. So I'm not going to tell you it doesn't happen because I know it does.
Further questions for Dr. Stremick? Senator Wallen.
Thank you, Chairman Roars. Mr. Stremick, going back to your line 9 of your must be related to an agenda item, you had stated that, or I've heard testimony anyway, that a lot of times the school board, you're having your meeting in public, but so you close your meeting in public and now you can open it up to the public if we have this go through for comments. And even though it's not on the agenda, could you limit your board members from not commenting on anything that was not on the agenda? Therefore, you're not violating the rule of public notice. Does what I'm asking make sense?
Madam Chair, Senator Wallen, members of the committee, yes, that would be possible. But again, a lot of people testify because they want to engage in the conversation. And I will tell you the rule number 1 for administrators and board members is do not engage. And I know you've sat on the other side. Sometimes that's very hard to do, is do not engage. And as soon as you engage, I will say they've won. That's their point. It would take some additional training. But again, I do think in all fairness, if we're talking about a program that you're running in the school district and you aren't notified it's going to be on the agenda, it's not fair to you because you aren't there to defend yourself. And then if it has to be put on the next board agenda, then just ongoing.
Any further questions? Senator Castaneda.
Mr. Stramick, just a little kind of housekeeping here, since we've got multiple amendments. Have you had an opportunity to see Senator Paulson's amendment
Brief
there? Okay.
FYI, it did just get uploaded. So for those
Exactly.
of you in the crowd, you can now see it.
He puts in, as in Senator Paulson, may be prohibited if the public comment includes confidential or exempt information or the public comment is otherwise prohibited by law. You requested an amendment that said comments about individuals, staff, or personnel of the school district are prohibited. Do you feel that what would be number 4, what I first read, encompasses what you would like to put in there, or would it need to be expanded?
Senator, Madam Chair, members of committee, I believe it would need to be expanded so that we're very clear on personnel could not be discussed. Again, the board is the judge and the jury on those issues if it comes to a non-renewal.
Further questions for Dr. Stremick? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Further testimony opposed? And just so you know, Claire, Allison, I am going to call you up in a neutral capacity if you don't get up on your own because I have some questions. One of you two. Oh, perfect. Even better. I could see you two. I'm like, if you're not doing it, I'm going to do it for you. So go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Roars and committee members. I'm Commissioner Sherry Haugen-Hufford, here to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 2180. The Commission strongly values public participation as a cornerstone of good governance, to go to great lengths to ensure the public has ample opportunity to provide input at all of our proceedings. For example, in rate cases, we hold public comment sessions both in person and remotely in all affected areas. When citing energy infrastructure, the commission travels to each impacted region to gather local feedback. Additionally, our robust public comment system allows individuals to submit their input in various formats, ensuring each voice is recorded and considered. To date, no one has ever been turned away from participating in these processes. While the intent of Senate Bill 2180 may be well-meaning, the legislation presents significant practical and legal challenges as the original bill submitted. From a practical standpoint, the Public Service Commission does not operate like a traditional board or local political subdivision with periodic meetings. Under Chapter 44-04, any gathering of 2 or more commissioners discussing public matters is considered a meeting, regardless of content. This includes our legal evidentiary hearings, work session, committee appearances, and even informal events like employee retirement celebrations. If public comment were required at all such gatherings, the commission could face many disruptions, with multiple comment periods potentially stacked throughout a single day. From a legal perspective, the commission's work is primarily governed by the Administrative Practice Act, chapters 28 through 32, which strictly prohibits agency heads from engaging in direct or indirect communication about pending proceedings without full notice and opportunity for all parties to participate. From the agency's perspective, requiring public comment in such scenarios will likely create conflict with the statutory obligations. It is these requirements, in addition to managing and establishing an evidentiary record, that the commission goes to great lengths to provide structure and opportunity to the public to provide comment and input. In summary, while the commission is deeply committed to public engagement, Senate Bill 2180 would impose impractical burdens and risk, violating legal safeguards inherent to our quasi-judicial role. Chair Rohrs and committee, thank you for your time and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Commissioner Haugen-Hoffert?
Thank you.
So based on your, based on your very brief time with the amendment, does it absolves you from this bill, so you can live with it as
Yes,
amended?
with us being dropped from it, then we have no conflict or opposition.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further testimony opposed? They have to write it based on, because we haven't amended it yet. So any further testimony opposed? I will now request. Oh, we have one online opposed. Sorry, I forgot. Flip it over on here. Miss Bieber? Leslie, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Here, I'm sorry. I'm walking on my treadmill here. Let me. I can't sit still for too long, so I have a treadmill under my desk. Thank you for allowing me to be here, Madam Chairman Rohrs and members of the committee. I have had a brief moment to look at the amendments, and you've heard a lot of what is in my testimony. Let me start out with, I am the superintendent of Alexander Public School. My name is Leslie Bieber. I'm in Alexander, North Dakota, and I've been here for 12 years. So I'm just going to touch on a few things that came to mind as I was listening to everything. Public comment, allowing public comment on non-items that are on the agenda. Even my board members are very restricted in bringing up new agenda items per our policy. And the reason is because I have to have time to plan. So you're restricting elected officials on what they can bring up, but not people who elected them. And if somebody comes up, this actually is a law in Montana, and I was had the opportunity to speak of a few of my colleagues out of Montana, and they do have problems with people coming up and saying things about personnel or violation of FERPA kids, even if the board president stops them. I have witnessed some board meetings, only one in Alexander, but in other areas where the person talking, the public person speaking, is slamming on tables and screaming above the board president, asking them to be quiet. And in any jury, if it concerns personnel, the damage is done. The damage is done. And so I will tell you as a superintendent, if they are complaining about me and it leads to an investigation of, and Paul Stremick comes in and does an investigation on me and it leads to my release, I will take that into account. I did not receive a fair hearing. And everyone in the United States has a process to do hearing, to the due process, as a right to the due process hearing. So that's gravely concerning for me, especially when it comes to athletics. In schools, athletics raise emotions. My job is to spend people's money, as it is your job, and to care for the most precious thing in their life, their children, and that raises emotions. With that, then I'm going to just move on to per our board policy. One of the questions was, how do people get to the board? And of course, they can contact me, they can contact my board members. My board president does have written testimony in there. I mean, if he hears that somebody's unhappy about something, he goes down to the coffee house. And in Alexander, we only have one place to go. And we'll say, hey, I hear you're unhappy. Why? And the reason, and as a board president, then he has to approve everything in our district. I set the agenda and then go through it with him and have discussion. And I will tell you that if he finds out that I am not allowing people, I will lose my job. So if I want my job, as the question was asked, I will allow people, even if I know that this could get me in trouble. And as board members, we do have a way, if they're unhappy with their board members, they're not elected again. That is the process to get them out if they feel like they're not justifiably heard. So what was my other? So to get on the agenda, you have to give me 24-hour notice. You can call the board president. You can call any board member and or email them, and all of their emails are on our website. So direct line to them. You contact them, and then it goes through either the board president or me. Eventually, it will get to us to be placed on the agenda. So I just want to make sure that that is very well known. The other thing is that when things are not vented out at an open public meeting, but they have to come to an administrator or to a board meeting, that's where relationships are built. In handling those situations, it may not be a positive relationship, but often it ends up in a positive relationship because people come in knowing one side. So when you are forced to discuss something rather just vent and be able to hear all sides, that's where positive relationships come out. And to have a two-way, and then it's handled at the lowest level possible. And eventually then if it needs to go to the board, and I will tell you that we have KACB, the personnel complaint, that has on our website. I have a packet ready, my principals have a packet ready, and it's the first thing I say. If you're unhappy with my decision, this is the next step you take to get to my board president. So I have to question, and I'm not sure of the answer. You commented yourself, if people were allowed to come into your public meeting as a committee and talk about anything. So even if the amendment does go to that, we know that it's been requested that it doesn't go to, it has to be an agenda item, but we're all public meetings and you're running a business meeting just as my board is running a business meeting. And I will tell you, there's one thing that there's nothing worse than being, and I'm sure that you guys know as legislators, there's nothing worse than being blindsided. If people know around you there's a problem and you're not allowed to prepare. And then you're asking that that happens at an open public meeting rather than allowing me or my board preparation for anything that's going to come out. Or a personnel member, if that's the case, if we're going to end up discussing it. They have to be legally notified. So there's one other thing. I'm sorry, I was making some notes. I'm just going to say, after 12 years of being here in a small town, where you have friendships, you have generational friendships, I and my board make decisions concerning personnel, hiring, firing, unfortunately, student discipline, student conduct that has all kinds of social dynamics to it. And so after 12 years, I have a lot of experience of navigating those relationships in a town of less than 400 people. They say that a superintendent angers 5% of their population every year. Well, I'm at 60%. And how I rebuild those relationships is allow conversation and trust. That's how I keep my job, and that's how my elected officials stay as my school board, on the school board. And I have long-term and new people all the time. So if they are unhappy, after a couple of failed referendums, one of my board members was not re-elected because they were unhappy with some things that were said at open public meetings. And that's the due process for the public as well with elected officials. So I think I respect your time and I respect the consideration. I urge you to oppose 2180 as stands for sure, and even with the allowance of the public comment on anything outside of the agenda. So I will stand for any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Bieber? Can you please say hi to Dale Patton's daughter for us? Is she still with you guys?
Was no longer with us.
I couldn't remember. I thought she was still there.
Yeah. But she's still my friend. So next time I
Okay,
see her,
good.
I'll say hi.
Sounds good. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Any further testimony opposed? Okay, neutral testimony. That's you.
Hello, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Annika Lockard. I'm an Assistant Attorney General. I hold the Open Records and Open Meetings portfolio. I am here in a neutral capacity to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, so help us understand the requirements for noticing the agenda versus the ability of the public to talk about any topic from a legal perspective. Like here, so for example, the comment that was made of, well, you can allow them to talk about it as long as you don't respond. Like, where does that lie on the legal spectrum?
For regular meetings, which I'm kind of skimming the amendments as
Yes.
well, and I think that's switched to regular meetings, right? So I'm going to speak to
correct.
noticing regular meetings.
Yes.
With a notice for a regular meeting, those can be amended. You can make changes to those notices. And then to the question about if you're in the public comment, that's agenda item number 1. They're talking about something that's not on the agenda. I think the person running the meeting would still be able to decide, we can move that to a later agenda item, we could talk about it later, or it's just public comment, they're hearing them out, and they move on with the rest of the agenda.
Can they respond if it's not a noticed topic?
Probably not in the public comment period. This is off the cuff, I'm answering questions here, but they could amend the agenda to a later amendment, a later agenda item. They can say, we'll address that later. That they can do in a regular meeting, would not be able to do in a special meeting. Special meetings, you're limited to the notice that you have.
Okay.
When you start the meeting.
I need to write that down because I have been in enough special meetings with Miss Allison Hicks in the back where I was told that I was not allowed to talk about
I
things.
hope they're
so
nodding along to me.
She is. They are.
Thank
so,
you.
Okay, any further questions for Ms. Walker? Senator Bromberger.
Just a technical question. How do you spell your last name?
Lockard.
I was not even close. I didn't even have your, not at all.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I called you Walker. That's what I heard one of the first time. So any further questions for Ms. Lockard? Thank you. That is helpful. That was where I was kind of stuck trying to figure out how this worked. So any further neutral testimony? We will close the hearing on Senate Bill 2180 and we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 2182. Clerk will read the short title.